Welcome to our new lesson together. Hoping you already downloaded the previous lessons. Get ready to our last three lessons together. So enthusiastic to see your quiz results actually because I didn't receive none of them till now. As we already agreed, we started since the early of this course to talk about certain scholars, methodologies, terms, and one of the most important terms that I left to the last is power, actually. And it would be the core element of our discussion in this session and in the coming. As you already know, political science is all about who can control what. That's why it is definitely impossible to talk about political science without discussing exactly what's going on under the term of power, authority, etc. That's why our session today will concentrate on power. Okay, in our session, we are going to discuss on certain objectives. We're going to have certain introduction. We're going to discuss power, authority, legitimacy, and we're going to have certain questions to answer. Um, First of all, I think it's very important to understand the political phenomena like power, authority, because they are the landscape of any attitude and they are the only justification to many results, to many phenomena, structures inside the world. So without really understanding the types of powers are used or the sources of power inside the world, I think it would be impossible to understand the political attitudes or political phenomena. Anyone who would study politics argue the correct meaning and scope of the study of politics. Two-board viewpoint view of normative and empirical investigation reflect in such arguments. Normative approach advocate idealism of what should be, while empirical always supported what is, as we already discussed in the previous sessions. And we're gonna to use these two scopes or methodologies to discuss the progress in dealing with power later on. 20th century study of politics stressed to look at the political phenomena from realistic angle actually, and hence emphasized more and more on the methods of science to understand the actual nature of politics. Based on this, politics became political science. Realism eventually lies to understand the political phenomena in applied science. This all leads to the importance of discussing power, authority, legitimacy, because after all the previous discussions, arguments, methodologies, they are always end up saying that power, authority are the core engine in understanding any phenomenon. Power, authority, legitimacy took over the field of political studies from the traditional idealism, institutionalism, etc., to new field of study. And present study, all the assumptions focus on how power manipulates the track of politics. In our lectures together, we're going to understand three concepts, differentiate between them, power, authority, legitimacy, and we're going to build a certain understanding where government could have a role among all of these and where the community or the society will stand, and the relation between all these subjects and people or citizen. And a very critical element because, as we said, nowadays studies or methodologies demands that citizens must be controlling everything. So if the government has the power, so how people would even affect any policies inside their governments. As we usually do whenever we deal with any term, let's go a little bit to see the historical progress and how many thinkers describe this term and the progress of the definition and etc. etc. Concepts of power occupied a very respectable position in the modern discussions of political science in the beginning of the 20th century. It becomes so inevitable nowadays uh, that's applied not only to describe the international relations but also the social unit like families. Um, any structure inside the community or in the regional or international level could never be separated from describing the concept of power. The concept of power altered the meaning of politics in a dramatic way and made it appear like contest of power. From Hobbes' description of the warring state of nature to the very Freudian's feminine mystic applied power as an analytical tool to describe the human relation at macro as well as micro level. So it is there since the early beginning of discussing politics till nowadays. The concept of power is a part of any discussion related to not only studying politics but also studying society, family, etc., etc. So, in other words, if it's there, if it's part of all of the discussions and literature, if certain thinkers saw it as a tool, what is power? I mean, how they define power in that sense. The concept of power has multiple meanings. It is an essentially contest concept. Not settled or agreed definition can ever be developed. In natural sciences, power is understood as force or energy. In social science, for example, it appears with diverse interpretations like the ability to achieve a desirable outcome and exercise of control by one over another, etc., etc. As we said, each science had their own contribution based on the track, the horizon, the tools of analysis. Power is a psychopolitical phenomenon, actually. It is both. We cannot study politics in a separation, from sociology and vice versa. In simple sense, it is the capacity of person, group, government, institution, any party to affect, change, modify the behavior of other person, group, institution, etc. In this sense, it is the capacity to influence the behavior of others. Further, this influence is not voluntary and not readily accepted by those over whom it is applied. Hence, power is the capacity of one to impose that will over others, irrespective of the will of others. When one succeeded in making other person do, which otherwise he would not do, or restricting other persons from doing things which otherwise that person want to do, then it is said that the will of first person is imposed on the other and hence power is applied. So it is not something very easy to define, but in a way or another, it is using certain tools to make others do things or don't do things away or in a separate level of their own willing. Okay, so what, in your opinion, could make power different from other concepts like force, for example, or like influence, or like authority? Force is the instrument of power. Like if we say a power is the concept, the tool of it would be the force. So force is the instrument of power. Influence is the outcome of power, and authority is the legitimized power. Force, influence, and authority in itself are not power, and this is the ambiguous part of this. Force is more physical and power is psychological. Relation between power and force is delicate. One and the difference is often blurred. Perceived threat of force can result in change in behavior of others, but if such fear is not present, then it is said the power not really there, and what remain is only brute force, which can defeat the person physically, but its mind will be non-defeated. Power is visible through influence. It can be seen in change in behavior of others. Whom power is exercised. Influence is the practice of power. Regarding the relationship between authority and power, it is sufficient to say that when power is accepted by the people over whom it is applied, it transforms into authority. Absence of power makes authority a puppet, and presence of power makes a common uncommon. So if people accept um, the existence of power, it turns to be authority in a way or in another. So the relation, it's like more cause and effect, because the existence of power ends by kind of authority. The crucial thing to locate power is to quantify the potential resources and to qualify the capacities to use these resources effectively to its optimum utilization. Both of these categories help us to describe the types of power later on. So let's move to another point. Let's talk more about types of power based on resources. As we said, power is not something very definite. It's not defined in a very restricted way. And one of the reasons why we cannot define power in a very restricted way is the multi-sourcing for power. So let's talk about part of these sources, and let's have examples on these sources. Number one, money. From ancient times, money, as we said, when we spoke about establishing nations, economic factors used to be one of the most important elements in designing, shaping communities, nations. So, from ancient times, money finance is considered as effective determinant of power. Plato, for example, advocated separation of finance from governance and thus underlined the importance of it. It's said that in modern days it is financial strength that makes persons, political parties, and nations powerful. Money excels over other resources in the capacity building in the capitalist system, and thus is an important source of power. Nowadays, if you want to have a look on the global system as general, you can see most of the fights, wars, problems, conflicts, etc. They are all over money, and people who have economics can even be much better, stronger in the global system than those who are have good military sources. Number two, military. Machiavelli advocated strengthening military capacity to make state powerful. Kingdoms in the past and nation states in modern days maintain big armies and advanced weapons in their countries to frighten any other parties from inside or outside. And they assume that having a strong military makes them powerful to protect and secure their lands. Destructive capacity of nations determines the power in which cases. So the concept of having good military, in a way, enable states or governments to have power. Remember here, we're not talking whether these kind of powers are good or not. We are only describing the patterns of sources. A new source is social status. Higher social status on the parameters of gender, class, race, enable the person to impose his will on others. This higher social status in the social hierarchy is desired by persons and groups to enjoy the privilege of power holders. At certain communities actually, and it's not in everywhere, because as we said before, the idea of discrimination, racism nowadays, it's very spread, and any criteria would make people feel inferior as rejected. But still, for example, German are seeing themselves much better or on a higher level than others. If you ever visit Canada or United States, the original people there, see themselves as higher level than immigrant than refugees, for example. The idea of immigration also is one of the critical points here. But again, we cannot like compare the importance of social status to military and money whenever we talk about sources of power. Okay, a new source of power could be numerical strength. Democratic polity, the number of followers or members of particular group determine the power of the party leader organization. Elections, for example, are won and governments are run on the support of people. Decisions are made and influence on the pace of support enjoyed from the people. And the number of followers or citizens are supporting certain party definitely change the balance of powers inside the community. It's not only inside the community. If you have people are supporting certain case in a global level, definitely it would affect the track of this case. So the numerical source of power is nowadays, especially after the role of social media and internet, etc., it's changed a lot of the concept of power. A new source could be the quality of the human resources. If people are more educated, committed, loyal, if they're so aware, if they are doing their job, if they are doing their duties towards the government, towards the community, whenever we have more committed human resource, this would be considered as a strength of the great nations. Uneducated, corrupt human resources are problems, are obstacles in front of nations to solve before being capable to say whether they are strong or not. That it's like over years and years demanding that human resources are one of the most important resources of powers inside the countries and outside. I'll give you one very simple example. Nowadays, whenever you do for freelancing or etc., people always prefer to hire Indians because there are many Indians working on freelancers, and they are offering cheap fees or cheap prices, and this is even extra cost for employers. Another point, if for example any country with uneducated, let's talk about Gulf. Sometimes most of the major positions in Saudi Arabia was occupied with foreigners because the original people there were not well educated in a way or another, and that was a problem they were trying to solve by many policies, etc. So human resources are one of the most important resources to make a nation powerful. If the previous was the discussion based on certain resources, we are going to discuss a new pattern of a classification of power based on the capacity to use these resources. What makes power as the capacity to utilize a valuable resources cleverly and not only presence of it. Thus, Tony Breton ruled over the vast territory for almost 150 years due to its skillful use of valuable resources. Sam British rule was overthrown by the Indian leadership during freedom struggle with optimum use of unarmed kind of fighting, of struggling, and manipulation of the international political entrapment of Britishers. In such manner, power can be categorized in the following manners, actually. A very clear example is the concept of leadership, and especially civic leadership. To have strong, charismatic leaders, leaders are capable to use and hire certain resources who can turn the course of the situation in its favor anytime with his or her leadership qualities. A leader guides, deviations, channels, the ability to change and to build an opinion with the community, to change the duty of the organization, for example. We have a lot of examples, like Gandhi, for example. But let's have a little historical background. We can have Winston Churchill during the Second World War. We can have Lincoln during American Civil War. We have a lot of examples of leadership actually who succeeded and changed the pattern of power and pulled out their countries from very miserable situations using no army, using no other sources, but their ability to encourage, to motivate, to maybe to stimulate people to believe. Another source of this power could be decision making. Right decisions at right time saves resources and energy and give victory to nations, organizations. One wrong decision of Hitler, for example, destroyed Russia and caused Germany a defeat during the Second World War. So sometimes it's not only about money. If you have money and you are not smart enough to run that money, definitely you're gonna lose it. If you have a huge army and you are not smart enough to run that army, definitely you won't be able to defeat anyone else. If you are not smart enough to be trustable by others, to encourage your people to trust you and to follow you, definitely you are not be a powerful leader, or you cannot create a powerful nation. A very important point of decision making nowadays is the concept of critical thinking and design critical thinking. And leaders are not only strong and powerful as we used to see them. Nowadays, they're supposed to have more and more advanced characteristics. For example, let's talk about Trump. Trump is a weird and unique example of leaders because in spite of all the problems and all that money, he failed to encourage American people to follow him in a way or another. While Gandhi, he was a normal person. He has no money, no power. In spite of that, he changed the track of human rights in general, not only for his country. Negotiations. Also, negotiations is one of the most important tools nowadays. It's not enough to be smart. It's also very important to be very tricky, to understand and study your enemy or your competitors. To run negotiation is one of the most important skills nowadays and resources of power, because if you have the information, if you have the capacity to negotiate and compromise, definitely you will own power. Negotiation is the only solution to avoid war nowadays, and definitely it is one of the most important diplomatic tools that equals war nowadays. The last point we're going to discuss in our this lesson, is propaganda. Propaganda is one of the most important dangerous tools ever that could change the image of power. I just want to mention one example. And the war between Israel and Masr previously, uh, بحرب الاستنزاف, what Egyptian people used to hear via radio changed the context of the war. They thought they were fighting, they were doing a great job, while unfortunately, definitely, Israeli forces defeated the Egyptian forces from the first minute. But the propaganda is very important to change even the face of everything. And because people are very emotional all over the world, definitely they get affected in a very easy way with media, advertisements, propaganda, and the most important part that the political parties are very aware of the importance of propaganda, so they are using it in a very dangerous way. Propaganda helps to manipulate the mind of people, to change the tendency of their beliefs, to create the favorable environment before the actual negotiation happen, or the war, or before forcing certain policies. Propaganda changed the idea of majority versus minority, because within hours you could change the identity of anything. In modern political science, using media propaganda is even more dangerous than the war, especially in elections and war, and dealing with certain political cases. The control over media is a key to hold power in modern days. Okay, thank you so much. Let's stop here. And I hope you bring up examples to countries who use propaganda for, let's say, change the pattern of certain cases. Thank you so much. Please be safe. And remember the puzzle for today. Give me an examples of governments who use one of the previous sources of power to change the pattern of certain case, or to change the balance of powers. Thank you so much. See you.